Hello, everyone, and welcome to InvenTank, the show for inventors where I am joined by a special guest host each and every week for some fun conversation and to help answer all of your burning invention questions. I'm your host, Lisa Lloyd, and we're streaming live today, or you may be catching the replay on one of your favorite podcasting platforms. InvenTank is made possible by the Invention Accelerator, helping inventors to skip that painful and expensive learning curve and invent wow products, protect them properly, and get them in front of the right people at the right companies to pitch like a pro for license. To learn more about the Invention Accelerator, go to theinventionaccelerator.com. In a moment, we'll begin taking questions, so feel free to drop them in the comments at any time. Say hi, let us know even where you're checking in to our program today from, where in the world you are. But first, before I do that, I'd like to introduce to you my special guest host today, Matthew Burris. Matt is the Innovation Manager at NCR Corporation, where he focuses on strategic innovation and new venture development. He's been instrumental in coaching teams to turn ideas into products with projected revenue, streams of over $532 million, and creating New Ventures Group, an internal accelerator, Shark Tank type program internally at NCR. He's also created a hybrid startup factory model, leveraging and adapting some of his best practices across private equity, venture capital, search funds, startup studios, accelerators, and startups themselves. Welcome, Matt. I'm so excited to pick your brilliant brain today, and I know that our audience is going to benefit so much from this. So thank you for sharing your valuable time and knowledge with us today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Our earlier conversations were fantastic.
So. I know. When we first spoke, I told you we need to stop. We're going to do the whole show while we're having our first conversation.
Oh, no.
And we need to stop. And for those who maybe are new to this program, I don't script this. I have a few questions, but for the most part, this is very organic. I want us to speak from the heart so that we can connect with you where you're at. So before I dive into my questions today, and I do have a few for you, would you mind sharing just a little bit about how you ended up in this wacky world of innovation and ultimately at NCR?
You know, it started way back when I was a kid. I always had that kind of invention streak. I grew up reading, Western novels and science fiction, and I would always look at those science fiction books, science fiction TV shows, be like, how can I make this real? And then on top of that, what's the business value? So, very early, I went to a college where there was a mandatory co-op program. So we had to get work experience in order to graduate. And early on, I had read the book E-Boys. And while I was working at a different company, I applied to Benchmark Capital to be an intern and was lucky enough to sit down for about 45 minutes with one of the venture partners there. And that probably got me started on that journey and really looking at that space. And it's like a theme that's always continued through my career. I ended up working at Sandia National Laboratories for a while, found a startup that had built a really innovative technology and was just going around getting some advice on, does it make sense for the labs to look at this a little deeper? And one of the managers we presented it to offered us $2 million cold. We didn't ask.
Meanwhile, people are begging for money.
Right. I'm like maybe 20.
Oh my God.
Right? I'm effectively an intern. I can't say yes no matter what I do. My mentor is in the room too. He's getting his master's degree. You have to have a master's degree at Sandia in order to run projects. So he couldn't say yes either. So we were like, what is this? And that's kind of the same theme has continued, right? I always looked for those opportunities that added a lot of value and figured out, hey, let's just ask for advice, and some really interesting things kind of happen along the way.
Wow. And then you went from this startup world and venture funding into innovation, which of course makes sense, right? But at a large corporation innovation, which is very different. How did that happen?
Very different. So coming off of the startup I did, MatterFab, which was a metal 3D printer startup, I was looking to just kind of, recover. And
recover from,
recover mentally, recover just everything. Doing a startup, unless you have a fantastic exit, you're probably hurting on the financial side as well. So it's recovery in every sense. And I was looking at a few opportunities, and NCR was really interesting because I'm a generalist. I like working in new fields and jumping into those new areas. And NCR offered 3 areas that I hadn't worked in before. So hospitality, retail, and finance. I'm like, hey, it's great. Like, I've worked in manufacturing. I've done some deep science stuff. I'm an electrical engineer. I've got an MBA. Let's do it. Let's see what is here. And I was really fortunate in that about 3 or 4 months after I started, my manager had applied for us to be a corporate team going through a local accelerator. And that accelerator was Flashpoint at Georgia Tech, where they really, really focus on customer discovery, and specifically customer discovery, removing the cognitive biases or countering them as much as you possibly can. And I was like, oh, this is some great stuff.
Your mind went, right?
I mean, the first day there, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. It's aligned with a lot of things I had kind of done naturally, but I was making a ton of mistakes because I hadn't really studied this.
Yeah.
And, the guy that created the program, Merrick First, he's basically done a PhD level dissertation on how to do this. And so unpacking that and then turning it into a process, it was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It slows startups down because often you start with an idea that's not the right idea.
Right.
You just keep going in that line, right?
Television. Yeah. Which is in some ways important and necessary, not to be completely disregarded, but certainly kept in check. Right? Trust but verify.
Yeah.
Before you go too far into the customer discovery, because I definitely want to get into that. In fact, that's really what I want to unpack for our listeners, our audience today. And I love what you said about it slowing them down. So that's what I'm going to come back to. But first, I always joke that there should be a 12-step recovery program for entrepreneurs. like AA, right? Hi, my name is Lisa. I am a recovering entrepreneur. Because failure is part of this process.
It is. You learn the most from it, but it's very painful to go through.
It is it can be more, depending on how much loss there is involved, the more pain there is. But no risk, no reward, no pain, no gain, they say, whatever. So with regard to customer discovery, let's start by just defining what that is for someone who may be listening and this is a whole new concept for them.
Well, I'll put it this way. If you go off and build a product without ever talking to a customer, the odds that you have it even close to right are incredibly low.
Why is that? my gut's not enough?
I mean, it might be. I mean, it definitely happens. If you happen to be the perfect customer, the ideal customer that would buy this, you've got all the right background, all the right experience, the odds are incredibly low. And the reality is we live in a complex world. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we probably don't know all of it. And we don't know all of it for every customer that's going to buy this. And that's where those gaps start really showing up. We don't know the reasons why people buy all the time. The factors that are creating the situation where they're actually going to buy. We need to understand those so that we show up the right way. Otherwise, they're going to say no. Right. So there's just so much to learn to try to put the right thing in front of the right people at the right time. And I think Steve Blank says it really well. There's no truth inside the building. You've got to go out and talk to people.
I love it. We have to put the right thing in front of the right people at the right time. I'm just going to let that sink in for everybody. Okay, so my first product, the French Twister, was a barrette to help put your hair up in a French twist. I was clearly my own ideal customer. I was young, 23 years old, didn't know, I was greener than green, just knew nothing about inventing, patenting, manufacturing. And then ultimately what I decided to do was license it because I was running out of time and money. And I licensed it to a hair accessory company. So obviously it was a good fit for them. I did zero customer insight, and I was very successful. And so when a lot of people came to me and asked me after, what'd you do? How did you do it? Teach us. And they were willing to even pay me. I was like, sure, I'll take your money. I'm a girl. I love giving advice anyway. Now you're going to pay me to give advice. Awesome. That sounds like a career I want. But I didn't know what made me successful. Mm-hmm. I only knew what I did. And that's all I could share. Fast forward, and a lot of products that were very successful, particularly in the hair accessory business, where I was the ideal customer. I got into toys, and that's the one that I was on Shark Tank with. And I had children, and I am big into being orderly and organized because I have massive ADD. And if I don't, I will get nothing done. And so I always told my kids to, it has a home, put it in its home. And so this toy was the result of that and some other things that played a role. Anyway, long story short, I did zero customer insights, and then I failed miserably. And that's when I made up that phrase, there should be a recovery program for entrepreneurs. And the irony is I put the millions that I made from all of those accessories successfully selling into this category that I had a decent enough amount of information on to get as far as I did. I sold through 7 container loads. We did, a decent amount of business, but ultimately still failed. And lost all of the money that I'd earned from the other products. I had to start all over. And that is shortly after that when I started working with companies on front end innovation, when I heard for the first time about customer insights and finding that balance between knowing what I believe and understand, and then also validating that with customers became not just important to me, but in my teaching to others, because now I knew why I had succeeded and why I had failed. And it made it more valuable, right?
Absolutely.
So what is the process for starters? We'll dig into that for finding out who the other people are that might use it and what this customer discovery process might be.
Well, there's a couple of places that you can start.
Okay.
Usually we identify a problem because we've experienced it or we know somebody who has. So we've kind of got an idea already in our mind who that potential customer might be, right? Necessity
is the mother of invention kind of thing, right?
Exactly. So, we can, immediately start trying to find those folks and talk to them. The challenge is if you've already have a solid idea of what the solution is, now you've got a fundamental problem. And it's because we're all human. We have these things called cognitive biases. They're mental shortcuts we take. And we all have one bias that shows up for entrepreneurs all the time, right?
Ooh.
Confirmation bias.
There it is.
I want information that proves my idea is right, and I'm going to ignore everything else.
I'm going to ignore everything else. Exactly. I only want to see what it's true in politics, right? It's true in religion. It's true in general. This is human nature to join a group of people that we agree with and stay away from the things that we don't agree with. But we need to unpack that in this process.
We do. And the biggest danger is, founders and entrepreneurs fall in love with their own ideas, right? We're all guilty of this. That's okay. You have to kind of step back though and realize that, I'm too much in love with it. Any idea in my mind is wrong. Day one, it's wrong. I don't know where, I don't know how, but I can I can just say it's wrong. My goal now is, with that mindset, where is it wrong and how do I make it better? That's something I can go out and leverage. And now I'm safe, right? I'm testing where my knowledge has got some fundamental problems. And where do I need to learn and where do I need to evolve this?
Yeah.
That's a really good mindset. It's I have a strong opinion on what this solution needs to be, who the customer needs to be, what the value is. But the mistake is to hold on to that strongly and don't let it change. The best thing to do is hold on to it very loosely. But with that strong opinion, it makes it very easy to test. So I know what I need to test, right?
Yeah.
It's this customer, it's this problem, this is the value. Those are things you can test.
So in a practical sense, when I had this toy, what might my steps have been that could have helped prevent my demise in the end, in the very beginning, with regard to researching what the consumer thinks about the idea?
Well, let's unpack a couple of the assumptions that you made with the toy, right?
Good. Yes.
One of the things that you said real clearly was, you need that space to be clean. Everything has a home. It needs to go back there.
Yes.
Okay. So, parents are probably involved in the buying process a little bit for toys.
A little bit.
They're going to have a little influence on where that money
Sure.
gets spent. How many parents have this same craving? And how many act on it? What have they tried? If they haven't tried anything, then even if they have that pain, they say it's something that they don't like, then obviously it wasn't important enough for them to even try to fix it, let alone spend money on it.
Right.
But you can start trying to unpack, just because we say something is important doesn't mean it actually is, right? The whole wants versus needs thing is not a great indicator of, if somebody will actually buy, because we all need to go to the doctor for annual checkup. We're good at that, right?
Well, we need to. We don't necessarily do it, but yes, it is in our best interest.
We all know we're supposed to, so it's not a lack of knowledge.
Right. And if you catch something early enough, you have the ability to do something about it.
If we do that annual checkup, we're going to live longer.
Yeah.
Hey, it's in our best interest to do it. Does that mean we do? No.
No. And for any number of reasons, we don't want to.
We get distracted all the time. So and that's kind of the challenge. So what's the situation that somebody finds themselves in where your product, they are just super drawn to it? And if that wasn't on the store shelf, they would be really, really upset. That's a really strong indicator that this is going to sell well.
And I think that was it, Ford, who said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right?
Yes.
So it's really important in the customer discovery process to not use it to ask them what they want in the sense that they think there's even an option, because your assumption, your bias is already implying that they know, and they don't, right? So how do you interview people to understand, you said how big the demand is, like where the opportunity is? Is there enough people out there who would agree with me that it has a home and care about the organization? How do I find that out?
So there's a couple of ways you can go about doing that. Let's see, how to unpack that one. That was a good one.
Let me give you a little cheat while you think about it. So one of the little hacks that I've come up with, and I'm anxious still to very much hear at an organizational level, you have bigger budgets and systems and processes that, independent vendors can't. So I've had to hack a lot of things to make it affordable and realistic for independent vendors to follow the same process, or at least get the net result that we're looking for. And so one of those is, for example, if you invented I'll use my own. I was going to say a pet product, but let's just say my toy, going into mom groups on Facebook that are specifically about organization and storage, and then another one maybe about playful learning, where there's and understanding, okay, the psychographic is in these groups. Now I just need to see if they'll jump on a call with me, and I can ask them, what do you currently use? How do you currently get your kids to put away their toys? What's that process look like for you? And just feeling my way through that conversation to understand from a design perspective, from an empathetic perspective, how they experience the same problem, so that I can get the insights then to move forward with.
Yeah, being curious. Exactly like you said. You got to go find where your customers are.
Where are they?
They already have a community somewhere, so start there. Yeah. But a big mistake is, talking about your solution first, because you've anchored them there. That's one of those other fun cognitive biases. And now they probably can't move too far off that anchor point. This is one of those things that happens in the lean startup approach a lot, because it's, hey, you got an idea? Okay, let's build it and let's put it in front of customers and let's get some feedback and data on where it needs to evolve. If you picked a good starting point, then you're going to be good. But if you didn't, then...
And that's why focus groups don't work. That's why we've abandoned focus groups in the last decade, right?
Right. And like you said, people aren't really good at articulating what they really need, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's really important to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost have to step back, get curious about them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are they trying to solve it? Right? You've got an idea. Hey, it's this toy is going to solve the storage problem, and having my floor clean, and I'm not stepping on Legos and killing myself every day.
Exactly.
Okay, how do you guys solve this at home?
Or how do you live with it? And if you do live with
Yeah.
it, why do you live with it? Because I think in asking questions like, what do you like about what you currently use? What don't you
Mhm.
like about what you're currently using in these situations, in this experience, we'll call it. And if you don't like it, why do you continue to do it that way? Gives me then the insight that I need to determine, first of all, from a holistic point of view, how big of a population, how big is the universe of people who are experiencing the problem, for
Yeah.
starters? Do they hate it enough that they would be willing to even invest in a change? That in and of itself tells me if I'm just going to be scratching my own back with this new idea, or if I'm going to try and scratch the world's back with my new idea.
Absolutely. And I love how you phrased most of those questions. This is a very interesting thing that came out of Flashpoint.
Yeah.
Asking why is very dangerous.
Mm.
And I know everybody's like, hey, ask why 5 times. But there's a cognitive bias rationale on why asking why is kind of bad. And that is we tend to make up stories.
Mm.
Now, they're based in truth often, they're based in our memory, but our memory is faulty by default. So the second you start asking why, you're asking, tell me the story of why this happened. And we're going to start putting in little details. And now, if we're relying on that story to be 100% accurate, we have a little bit more of a problem.
Right on.
So asking, how did this come about? What was the situation that led up to this? Using the how and the what phrasing allows you to avoid that, and
Love it.
Gets a little closer to objective fact.
I love it. I'm so glad you pointed that out. So
people have bad memories, so it doesn't matter.
That's absolutely true. And the reason I'm glad what you've helped me do today is make sure that I am more specific or deliberate and intentional in the words that I choose. I would still ask why, but I wouldn't ask why about a story. I'm only asking why about feelings, because what I'm getting at is the heart. Again, if I want to design a product, a solution to a problem, we'll say in this case, empathetically, not just for myself, but for the population that serves that experiences that problem, then I do want to try as much as possible to understand why what they feel. So what you love, what you don't, and why you love and don't love gives me a little bit more insight on that.
Especially, where you're trying to elicit that story, elicit that emotion to help with marketing, to help with branding.
Right, now you get your buzz.
Understand what's going to, hit those emotional triggers. Now you want you want all of that feedback.
Right on.
And so, really designing how you ask those questions is really important. And going through Flashpoint, I love the program. I love how academically rich it is, but it's a huge lift to learn. And the best resource that I found afterwards that covers, I'd say, about 80% of it is the mom test. It's a fantastic book. It's an incredibly quick read. And, the framework is really simple. If you're building a product or anything, and you put it in front of your mom, how are you going to get real good feedback on what you just showed her, right?
Yeah.
If you're showing her an app, does she know anything about, is she even the ideal customer, right? Or is she just going to say, hey, this looks great, I love it? Well, that's nice. That makes you feel good, but it isn't anything you can use to learn from. And that's the trap we all fall into. Compliments are great, but you learn a lot more from a no with why this doesn't work, or why, what's going on that I don't like about this. I like no.
So I just popped up on the screen here for our audience who is viewing, and for those who may be just listening on one of our replays, you can go to Amazon.com and you can plug in the Mom Test to learn more about the book. You can get it in audiobook or paperback. You can even get it on Kindle. But if you wouldn't mind, just tell our audience real quick what basically what the book is about.
It's really a quick tactical guide with a few stories on how to do customer discovery, how to phrase the questions to get usable information out of those interviews. And that is so powerful because naturally, if we are not using a resource like this, if we're not trained in how to do this, we're not going to be asking the right questions all the time. Right. It's just the way it is. And then we kind of anchor on those insights, and we don't want to move off of them. And those insights might not be very good. And that happens all the time. The story in Flashpoint was mud pie. Mm-hmm. So, you're a parent, your kid comes running up to the front door and says, "Hey, Mom, Dad, look, I made this mud pie for you." And of course, as a parent, you're like, "Oh, that's great. That's exactly what I wanted." Right? Founders do this all the time. Entrepreneurs do this all the time, right? Mm-hmm. "Hey, look, I made this great product. Don't you love it?" "Oh, they said yes. Everybody's going to want it."
Exactly.
So, that's not something to base our actions on.
I'm going to jump into some questions here from our audience. Gabriel is asking, is it a good idea to search out other patent holders who have invented similar inventions as yours and ask them to help you license your patent, or would they be put off by you encroaching on their territory?
Ooh. Well, you're dealing with a person, so that's going to be hard to predict ahead of time. Mm-hmm. If that patent is owned by a company, I'd say you're getting in potentially dangerous territory. You don't know how that company typically handles things. So I've seen some companies that are very litigious when it comes to IP, and some companies that are a lot more open. So unfortunately, like a lot of things, this is going to be very situational. Mm-hmm. I would tend to not myself. If they're an individual and they've patented it, assuming it's still a valid patent, they paid the maintenance fee, so it's still active, and they haven't been able to license it. I don't know how well that conversation would go.
If they had success, then, yeah. Maybe if there's an inventor that has already been successful with a product that's similar to yours, and they don't see it directly threatening their income, their ability to earn on their own product, maybe they would be willing to.
And if they successfully license something in that same space, maybe you go to them and say, "Hey, I'll partner with you," right?
Yeah.
They know the right folks. They've already got ins with them. They can get meetings that you cannot. So leverage that. I think that's one thing I've learned, over time is, if you're going to build a company, if you're going to license a product, sell anything, having a good chunk of a lot is better than all of nothing.
Right. Or even a small amount of something.
Yeah, I'll take a small amount of $1 million.
As long as you're not losing money, right?
That's right.
And Wendy is a regular. Hi, Wendy. So glad you're here today. And I love your question because it gets us right back on track here. And by the way, for those of you who are just joining us, you can ask any question. You don't have to be topic related. That was a great question. I'm glad you asked it. But drop your questions in the comments and we'll get to them in the order they come in. Okay, Wendy, how is a focus group different from reaching out to mom's organization group?
Well, I think Lisa, you've been involved with probably more focus groups than I have. So I don't know if you want to take some.
Yeah. All right. So, and then I'm sure I'd love you to weigh in when I'm done.
Sure.
The difference is focus groups tend to happen after. They used to do them before, but more often it was after there was something already developed. So you have something and you're putting it in their hands and you're asking them on a scale of 1 to 10 and what price points and that sort of thing. They're useful in the context of what the value is that they provide, but they are not they shouldn't be overestimated in their value. They have a very small amount of value add. So I'm not saying that you would never do them, but just understand that they're probably just extra work. Now, the mom group that I was talking about as an example for the toys was very early on. In fact, we call it the front end of innovation. At the very beginning, when you first have your idea, you do your customer discovery that Matt's talking about to evaluate two things. First and foremost, is there really an opportunity here? Am I the only person that has this problem, or am I part of a very small group of people that see this as a problem worth solving? So that I know whether or not I should invest any more time or money in it. I'd rather fail fast at the very beginning and move on to my next idea. So this is why bias needs to get out of the way. I just want to know how other people experience the problem, if they even have it, that sort of thing. Then the second thing that early discovery teaches me is how to now invent I might have an idea for the solution, but I haven't actually sat down and built it and created it and patented it yet, because it's too early if I haven't found out how other people experience the problem. So that discovery and those insights tell me how to invent now a solution that is empathetically designed. It's called design thinking, in a way that solves the problem, not just as I perceive it, but more holistically as the population at large who experience the problem see it as well. So there's the distinction between the two. A focus group is usually showing people what you have, versus in the beginning, customer insights are finding out how people experience it. Matt?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a lot to build on that. That's
okay.
The early days is very messy, and it can start a lot of different ways. But finding those customers or people that can give you insight into what's going on is critical. I'll share a story that, one of the few that I can with some details from NCR. So a couple of years ago, I sat down with a member on the innovation team, and he had worked in a bank branch as a branch manager for a number of years. And we had looked at previously some frictionless technologies. So this is similarly, Amazon Go, just walk out purchasing. And with him, we sat down and said, hey, there's this nice piece of technology. We know how it works in the retail store environment. Can this be applied in banking? If so, where would we do it? What's going on? So with that lens, the conversation I had with him was like, what happens in a bank branch? I've never worked there. I don't know what normally happens. And so he started walking me through, like, here's the day, here's the week, here's this, stuff that happens. Mm-hmm. And a weird thing kept popping up, something called dual control. So in a bank, anytime a valuable asset moves around the branch, and usually this is cash, it requires the dual control process to be used. It's one of the most sophisticated processes you've ever heard of. It's called the buddy system and a paper log. Your McDonald's bathroom cleaning log is used to move $250,000 from the safe into the ATM, for example.
Wow.
This is how all banks all over the world do this.
Wow.
We have a little bit more technology, but it's by default paper.
Wow.
So we're like, oh, wow. Okay. And this happens multiple times a day? Like, oh, yeah, all the time. So anytime you've been to a bank branch and the teller's like, can you give me a minute? I got to go do something. Or, I got to grab, a manager or whatever. That was dual control. They had to go get something that was locked up, and they needed to follow this process. So we're like, wait a second. If you add computer vision and you build a few other layers of interaction, you start automating this. Like, yes, great. Well, that can save a lot of money per branch. It's over $70,000. Like, that's interesting. But there's a bigger story here. And we had to start talking to banks to really understand how this process that happens in the very front end of the branch plays out across the whole organization. Because all of that information that gets created, all those logs are stored for 10, 15, 20 years sometimes on paper in Iron Mountain. So when they do a financial investigation, they literally are going to call up and say, hey, can you ship these pallets of documents from this bank?
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy.
It's like, wait, this is not 1980. Like,
right. Yeah.
So as we started peeling this one back, like, we knew there was value at the branch, but we had no idea how intertwined this process
ripple effect.
Everything.
Yeah.
Investigations, risk management, anti-fraud stuff, the training, and it was incredible. Internal audits is a huge one. So like, oh, the value is really changing the entire process.
You have a lot of constituents who have value from that ripple effect. Yeah, that's amazing.
So if we just said, hey, no, we're going to apply it in the branch and stopped looking, we would have missed the big picture.
All of that.
Completely.
Yeah.
And so we have to talk to everybody to understand it.
And the opportunity to innovate solutions that address all different touch points becomes more obvious as a result of allowing yourself to walk through that entire from the beginning to the very end of the deliverable, right? All of the people who have to touch it along the way, which, we talk about that in the Invention Accelerator as something that you're not just solving a problem for that end user. The manufacturer has to be able to make it and make money, right? It has to ship and be deliverable at a cost-effective means. It has all of these other things. So if you don't understand all of that, in some cases, what you don't know can hurt you. Most of the time, that's not going to be a big deal, but it's definitely come up in my journey for sure.
My favorite one for startups often is they price things wrong, and especially for enterprise, business sales. A large company like NCR or any other Fortune 500 company, they've got a purchasing department. And those guys are judged, their performance relies on them getting discounts. So if you didn't budget for a discount that you can give to all of your business customers, you've got a problem.
Right? All right, let's jump back into our questions here. Marilyn's asking, how would you approach a company or what kind of company with an idea like a pet rock? So it's a novelty kind of item. You're really selling a gimmick. Who would you approach? Well,
I would probably end up with sales and marketing. This sounds like potential swag items for conferences. And they're always looking for something new, right? It's how to grab somebody's attention, keep it long enough that you can have the conversation you really want with them, or something that is interesting enough they're going to take back with your logo on it and put on their desk at work.
Right.
Unless you're selling something that has clear ROI and clear business value, that's often in business where you end up is more on that side. And this is assuming you're more on the product side.
Right. Yeah, and I would echo that. Marilyn, the only thing I would add is that the approach is the same. You have a sell sheet and or video that demonstrates the value proposition. How does what you have compare to what the alternatives are? And if it's a gimmick, then the alternative is not having that fun in your life, as an example, right? Your life will be less full. It's like the hula hoop. Who would have ever thought if someone came to me with this round thing and said, hey, people are going to do this, I would have probably laughed and said, I can't help you with that. And yet it went on to sell billions of pieces. And the pet rock similarly. So you're just comparing what it would be with life, like what life would be like without the product, I suppose. But the value proposition is just inherently in the fun of it if it's that type of gimmick. And so the pitch is all around that. And then the type of company you'd go after is most easily found. And this is true for anybody who's within my listening ears right now, my voice right now, sorry. Who's your ideal customer, which is what we're talking about. Is it people who professionals who want that on their desk? Is it a sharper image type product? Okay, fine. Then those are the types of companies you're going after. So think about who the ideal customer is, where they buy that product, go to those places where those types of products are currently being sold, novelty. And back in the day, it was Spencer Gifts, for example. Go up and down the aisles or look in those catalogs or go online to those places and look for the brands that are currently selling to those people. And those are your ideal customer or your ideal companies to call on with your widget. It's the same process no matter what. So I hope that helps. And if it didn't, please add more, just fill in. If we didn't answer your question, just ask it again, maybe in another way. Okay, next question is from April. April would like to know, what department do you contact to ask if they accept outside innovation? I have a design and a utility patent and I want to license it. Hi, April. Thanks for your question. It's different in every company. So just asking the company, hey, do you accept new product submissions for licensing? And if so, what's your process? If you're going on LinkedIn and you're trying to figure out who that might be, then going to the company page and asking them. I have a video, by the way, on YouTube. In fact, let me pop that banner up for you really quick. Going on LinkedIn, going to the company page, going to the people tab, and then specifically connecting with maybe someone in marketing, someone in innovation, like Matt, the innovation manager at the company, they're going to be able to direct you to the right department if it's not them. Matt, how is it at your company at NCR?
That would be a good question. I'd have to ask a few people. So we don't get too many, at least in my experience, submitted directly to us for
Product
license.
submissions.
We do have a lot of folks reaching out to us for, to potentially partner, integrate with our existing solutions, or, is this something that NCR would buy? So we do have that. We don't get too many, at least, like I said, in my experience, we don't get too many inbound. We do like the license
solicitations. Yeah. Well, because you're a tech company. So it's definitely a different model, so to speak. But I think that's going to change over the next 10, 15 years. It's going to be a lot more tech licensing from consumers of technology who have these ideas, because the barrier to entry is coming down, and it's getting easier for us to hire developers to help us create those prototypes and stuff. It'll just be interesting to see how that morphs. That's a whole nother conversation.
Oh, yeah. And I'd say, honestly, one of the challenges is going to be how businesses tend to make those kinds of decisions. Right? The larger the company, the slower that stuff often happens. And the more people are involved in the process, that means it's a lot easier for somebody to say no for whatever reason.
That's right.
And then you don't hear anything for months.
Right. Which is the case now anyway, right? So for those of you who would like to learn more about how to do that type of licensing, who to contact, I have videos on YouTube, totally free. You can go check them out. One of them is even LinkedIn hacks, how to use LinkedIn to find companies and to find the right people at those companies. Just go to youtube.com/ICanInvent to check that out. And let me just turn that banner.
And I'll double down on that. LinkedIn is my favorite tool for outreach, right?
And
the right people with the right background, reach out to them. It's amazing who will actually respond.
Really
reach out cold to CEOs of companies and be like, hey, you're like 3 jobs back, you worked here. I'm learning about this industry. Can you talk to me about it?
That's how I found you.
Yeah.
That's how we became friends. So I literally was looking for innovation experts to talk to. Awesome. Let's see here. Sterling Hair Solutions. I would like to bring together 50 hairstylists to view and give feedback of my latest prototype. What's the best way to do this, Matt?
So I would start by, one, is there a few things you'd like to learn with that group? That's a pretty large group, right? Is there a few things you'd like to learn before you show that prototype? That way you get some unbiased feedback before you've created an anchor point that might pull them into a very different headspace. Once you're, actually showing that product, what are the concerns that you have? What do you actually want to test? What is critical? I think Lisa was going through, you mentioned manufacturing before. Are there aspects that you could redesign it a little bit and lower your costs? Does that actually impact people? There's so many different angles that you can take here. And, the big thing is, what is the right thing for you to be asking right now in your situation? What moves the needle for your business? What do you need? Right? And that's going to be very different based on your situation. Do you need to understand if this is something that people would buy? Would they be really upset if this is not in shelves next month? Great. Okay. Is it good enough for them? And, good enough is an interesting standard, but it's kind of critical in a lot of ways.
You're saying it's really important to know what the outcome is that you're looking for, not the bias outcome, but what are we trying to learn from the focus group is what I'm hearing you say.
Right. If you're just going in and asking a bunch of questions, that's not going to be useful. Right. Set up your learning goals ahead of time.
Yes.
What are the hypotheses you want to test?
Yes.
I know everybody loves using that word. Personally, I hate it. I look at more like, think of it this way. A hypothesis is an opinion.
Which is an assumption.
Yes. You have an assumption on how your customers are going to respond. Okay.
Yep. Let's test it.
Accept it. Right.
Yep.
Now test it.
Let's test it.
How do you test it? Well, that's where the mom test can come in and helping you frame that question so that you don't lead the witness.
Yeah.
And try to drive to the answer that you want. We all do this in conversations. Well, isn't this important? Well, how about that? Hold on now.
Yeah.
You're biasing the witness.
Yeah,
You're
no,
not
pick up the
helping
mom
yourself.
test, because that book really will help you answer this question in much more detail. But you said something, Matt, that I would love to unpack a little bit more for everyone's sake. 50 is a lot of people. What is a reasonable sample size to feel like the data is solid?
So in the early days of a startup, I'd say 10. And yes, that is still an arbitrary number, but you start getting a little bit of insight because you still have so much to learn and so many unknowns that after 10 data points, assuming these are individuals that are similar, right? You don't want to say, oh, it's 10 radically different customer profiles. Well, that's not doing yourself any good.
Right.
But 10 voices
Same
of the
people
same
group.
customer profile.
Okay.
All right, now you can start making some conclusions, right? Do you need to change what you need to test now?
Mm-hmm.
And it's good enough, right? It's good enough for right then. Later, okay, you just said you have a product, a prototype to show. I don't know how high fidelity that prototype is, but if you're on the cusp of going to manufacturing, maybe 50 is the right number, right?
Yeah.
Now you're looking for something that is more statistically meaningful and is not going to change a lot if you add another 50 people to that sample size, right? That becomes the good enough standard. So good enough is flexible, but it's really difficult to wrap your head around sometimes because it's good enough for right now. Your right now is different from anybody else's right now.
So you may do this multiple times because of the iterative process or the iterative nature of innovation. You may have to keep coming back and doing 10. I could see that. That's interesting. I've never really thought about it that way. I usually advise 35 to 50 to set an expectation. But the way that I suggest it be approached is when you get to the point where you are consistently getting the same data points, you're done. And if that's 10 or 20 or 35 or 50, if you're at 50 and you're still getting random new data out of the conversations, it's probably important to keep going until you're starting to see the trend well enough to know what you need to know.
At that point, I'd also stop and look at your the people that you're talking to.
Oh, good point.
Do not divide up these customers right.
Yeah.
Are there some subtleties that you need to start accounting for?
Right. No, that is really, really good. So in the direct response business, for example, where we do these commercials and we're using data to test our products initially by putting it out there to the number typically is 1,000 people will submit it to. We want 100 respondents. So maybe we have to get to 2,000, whatever it is, to get to 100 respondents, because we found that, and this is just because you need a number. If you live by the numbers, you die by the numbers. So it's really just a number, a starting place. And there are variables, but generally speaking, from the metrics, then we have science that tell us, okay, we know the industry is this, the category is this big. So we need this many respondents to tell us these answers to then be able to make an intelligent business decision about whether or not the business is worth going after. And it changes from product to product, right?
Oh, very, very much so. And, every company, if I go inside of NCR and, talk to a lot of the product managers and VPs there, and you're like, okay, how big does an opportunity need to be for them to actually start paying attention? There's a lot of factors in there, right? But one of the big ones is everybody's busy. So if they're going to pay attention to this, they're not paying attention to something else, which probably means they're going to remove a product. So the value that you have to bring has to be so much bigger that we can justify turning off a revenue stream to go look at this. That's a very high bar.
Yeah, it is. Oh my gosh, the questions are flying in and we've only got about 11 minutes left here. So I am going to do my best to just stay on track and not ask you my own questions going forward. Okay, so Tamaj is asking, could you give a practical example of interviewing customers in the right way?
Let's see.
Just kind of what I was asking you earlier. My questions are my three main, and there are more because every product's different. My three big takeaways that I want are, what do you love about what you currently use? What don't you love about what you currently use? And why? Why do you feel that way about those things? So that unpacking of those things. And then that leads into a conversation. What about you?
Yeah, I think it also depends on where you are in the whole process. If you're starting, then I typically want to understand like the absolute basics. If it's somebody in business, they're doing a certain kind of job, I want to know what is it like doing that job. Walk me through everything, right? That starts it starts providing the ability to see points of friction that the person who's doing that job would never see because it's how it happens, right? This is how we do it here, right? But you can go, that made no sense. And the last 5 people we talked to all do it this way. Like, what the heck is going on? That's great. But if I'm going for something more specific, it really depends on what I'm looking for at that time.
Right.
I'll always create one question or two, or usually about.
Is there 1 or 2 questions that you always ask, Matt?
Almost no. And the reason is I'm always going into a set of, I'm trying to learn something. So
right. So knowing what you want to know. It begins with your hypotheses. It goes back to what am I assuming here that I want to make sure I'm right, either validate or invalidate. That's the goal of the interviews.
So, there's a couple of frameworks that I do use. I like the, how do you, approach this? What do you do today? Those are fantastic, right? You need to understand that because no matter what your product is, there are alternatives, including nothing.
Doing exactly. Living with it. Yeah.
The biggest killer of them all. Okay. Recognize that them, however they've been doing it, they're just going to keep doing it that way.
Okay with that. Right.
That's probably 90% of people to start with. Right. So understand that. Understand how people have tried to solve it, because that gives you a lot of really interesting insight in how much money have they spent, how much time have they spent, how valuable is this really for them to solve. I love trying to figure that kind of stuff.
Yes.
But there's another one, which is I would also try to disprove what I think is valuable. So this is flipping the script, right? We all have that confirmation bias. Well, instead of trying to confirm this is a value, let me disconfirm it.
Yes.
Right? You go, hey, we've talked to a lot of people and they said that this is really not all that valuable to solve.
Yeah.
And if the person that you're talking to goes, who have you been talking to?
Yeah.
They're out of their minds. Like, this is huge. Okay, you're onto something. But if they go, yeah, okay, I can kind of see that.
Right.
And it probably falls in an area of indifference. A solution, they are indifferent to your solution compared to what they have today. So that's not good. It's not meaningful enough.
Tamaj, think of it this way. The whole point of customer insights, doing customer discovery conversations, is to test and either validate or invalidate your hypotheses, whatever your assumptions are. And the most important thing, and this is what we began the conversation with, and what Matt was trying to drive home and has over and over, is to get your confirmation bias out of the way in these conversations. And if you do this earlier rather than later in your innovation journey, then you will invent better products or walk away and lose less because of what you learn from it. That's when you ask the question the right way, that's the right way. Now, what form or shape or questions that evokes is going to be different every time. So I hope that helps answer your question. I'm going to fly through these. Ready? Think of it. You're in the hot seat, Matt, real quick. We answered her first question. So the second question from Sterling Hair Solutions, who should be the first employee on your team that investors are looking to see?
The first employee is probably the founder and the founding team, right?
The founding team is going to hire. Who do you think that would be?
That is going to depend on who you already have on board. So you have skill gaps. What are your skill gaps? Right? Do those skill gaps need to be filled now? If so, then that is who you're going to target to hire first. The other way to approach it is, what are you spending so much time on that you should not be, and hire somebody to do that?
Yeah.
Right? Free your own time up to focus on the more valuable tasks. So 2 options, depends on your situation.
Good question. And the best way for you to answer it for yourself might just be say, look at your team. What do investors want to know? They want to know about the product and about the team. Can you pull it off? Can you successfully create a return on their investment? And the question is, what team players are necessary to pull that off? And do you have that team put together? And whatever's missing, those are the gaps you have to fill. Mark is a member of the Invention Accelerator. Hi, Mark. So glad you're here. I've spoken with potential licensee. They asked for more information on flexibility and locking mechanism. He has a new edging type system for lawns. Mm-hmm. I've provided design and rendering drawings. How would you respond? You know what, Mark? I think I'm going to ask you to hold off on this one, and I'm going to answer that for you in our call, or we can even talk after this show, because I want to unpack that more with you. But for anybody who might want to learn with you, answering the questions that they ask, the best way to do it is just directly. I mean, just understand that there might be something behind the question. And so if you're not sure what they're really asking, then ask them to explain the question better, so you can make sure you're only answering what they really want to know. Often they're not asking what they really want anyway, right?
Yeah. Just ask them, hey, there's a lot of ways I can answer this. You need to understand really where your concerns are, so I answer the right question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And demonstrating, as Joel is saying in the chat here, demonstrating it is the best way to do that. That's easy enough. Gabe is back and asking if you're also embarking on another business venture, but don't want to form another LLC. Should you do a DBA, even if the two ventures are completely unrelated?
I would not.
Okay.
Real simple. No, limited liability is to protect you. And once you start commingling anything, now that new concept, if it's really successful, has liability exposure through the initial company you created. So keep them separate. LLCs are very, very cheap to create. I know I've created many of them, 50 to, $150 generally a year. So it's not that bad.
And if it's a venture, it's different than if you're licensing. If you decide, like I have Lloyd Marketing Group, but I still and I have a couple different divisions depending on the services, but they're all in the same wheelhouse. As an inventor, all my inventions I just do personally. They're all done as sole proprietors, and the royalties all come straight to me instead of through my company, so I don't get double taxed on that stuff and have to pay extra. So anyway, I keep those things separate. But all my inventions I do as a sole proprietor.
And I would say we're probably both not lawyers, so go talk to one if you really need specific legal advice.
Exactly. You've got legal and accounting, right?
That's right.
To get the pros, get their feedback. There's a lot of reasons for the different strategies, and then you can make a good business decision. It's not just a legal decision. Celeste is asking, she says, not sure if this is a good question, but what will make an app patentable?
So think of what is the secret sauce of the app, right? You can go after design. Those are, in my mind, generally less valuable, less protectable than the utility. The utility is going to be that really secret sauce. That's going to be the unique intellectual property that makes what you're doing actually work. Depending on what you're doing, that is very, very patentable. But it's really going to be a little bit deeper technically often than just the app itself.
That is out of my wheelhouse. The technology.
I've worked with a lot of patent lawyers and provided some of the background to create. I think there's 40 plus patents filed through NCR. You need to be able to explain the deep technical aspects of what is going to be covered in the patent. And if you cannot do that, then it's probably not patentable.
Right on. How, in the last minute that we've got here, how do you see, or what do you see the future in technology being with regard to intellectual property, and how important will it be? Because tech is changing so fast, enforcing it, defending it almost doesn't make sense in a lot of cases. So how do you see the future of intellectual property for technology?
Well, technology is coming to the IP landscape as well. And so I think you're going to see an acceleration of both licensing and people trying to defend their intellectual property. So, it's a time-honored and very powerful business strategy. I think that is going to continue no matter what. There are people who really want to protect it, and how that game is played will change a lot.
Right.
We're just really on the cusp right now, I'd say, of a lot of automation coming to the legal area, and that's IP, right?
Right.
The lawyers can go through, hundreds of thousands of pages of discovery in a week. Okay, I'm sure they can start combing for, IP infringers a lot faster too, very soon.
I just hope I live long enough to watch the evolution, because for me, it's, I know some people freak out, but I love watching change. So thank you, Matt. I cannot believe that isn't a whole hour, and I'm afraid it's time to wrap up. Special thanks to the Invention Accelerator for making this program possible. If you've enjoyed the show today, please help us get the word out by sharing our show with your network and following InvenTank on your favorite podcasting platforms. When you subscribe, you help me get more great guests like Matt today and continue to bring incredible shows. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you again, Matt. I appreciate you so much. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.